Unlike most games, AD&D is an ongoing collection of episode adventures, each of which constitutes a session of play. You, as the Dungeon Master, are about to embark on a new career, that of Universe Maker. You will order the universe and direct the activities in each game, becoming one of the elite group of campaign referees referred to as DMs in the vernacular of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. What lies ahead will require the use of all your skill, put a strain on your imagination, bring your creativity to the fore, test your patience, and exhaust your free time. Being a DM is no matter to be taken lightly. That was Gygax back in '79, and this video is part 1. If you want to run tabletop games the way they were meant to be played, if y'all are here to run a grand campaign, and you are, I think your best shot is to go all in on running a great first adventure. Howdy folks, Gelatinous Rube here. Welcome back to running the grand campaign. Today we're going to discuss what makes a fantastic starting adventure for grand campaigns, how to make multiple starting threads without a corresponding increase in work, and how a timeline of consequences can spawn in the rest of a campaign. I should tell you folks before we start, this video being part 1 is intended to be a bit of a checklist or partner while you draw up your adventure. Let's get down to business with a little more help from Gygax. Your campaign requires the above from you and participation by your players. To belabor an old saw, Rome wasn't built in a day. You are probably just learning, so take small steps at first. The milieu for initial adventure should be kept to a size commensurate with the needs of campaign participants, your available time as compared with the demands of the players. This will typically result in your giving them a brief background, placing them in a settlement, and stating that they should prepare themselves to find and explore the dungeon/ruin they know is nearby. As background, you inform them that they are from some nearby place where they were apprentices, learning their respective professions, that they met by chance in an inn or tavern, and resolved a journey together to seek their fortunes in the dangerous environment, and that, beyond their knowledge common to the area, speech, alignments, races, and the like, they know nothing of the world. Placing these new participants in a small settlement means that you need do only minimal work describing the place and its inhabitants. Likewise, as player characters are inexperienced, a single dungeon or ruins map will suffice to begin play. You heard the man, just one settlement and just one dungeon are enough to begin. You might think a grand campaign needs something more flashy and eye-catching to start, but really, the seeds of a grand campaign don't require much more than their base elements repeated across play. But to give you a direction on where to start, we're going to begin with a concept or theme that you can build your starting town and starting dungeon around, and it's going to be, let's see here, we're going to start with a mystery. Mysteries, seeking a person, place, or thing, are always a great start to grand campaigns. I say this because it's the optimal setting for introducing a variety of factions and NPCs and to establish some changes to the campaign map shortly thereafter. Your players don't know what the campaign map looks like or who lives there, but exploring the kinds of change a mystery sets up allows your players to absorb new information at a similar pace as their characters. Let's split this up between setup, structure, and we'll zero in on combat to finish things off. Encounters, really. So, what kind of mystery do we want to set up? We're gonna put a person or thing inside of our dungeon, leave places for future sessions. People are easy to use as combat encounters or future allies, sometimes both. Great way to spend session time. Things. Things people want to find tend to double as loot, or they're found next to loot, or they can be traded in for loot. I find new players adapt to mysteries particularly well when adventuring in a populated area, so we're going to give them one right on top of the dungeon. Cities, towns for the beginning of a campaign like this one, have this Goldilocks zone of spare NPCs that you can cajole, bribe, persuade, flirt, or beat into helping you on a quest. It's reasonable to see a shady thief dive into a back alley and for your players to give chase, capture the thief, and interrogate him for information. Maybe the thief doesn't know what your players are after, but he works for somebody who does. There's a hypothetical glut of plot coupons in cities for any kind of adventuring that's more difficult to brute force through combat, but you can do a mystery with combat. It's just more of a passive experience, and to be honest with you, a more passive experience is probably fine for tutorial missions like these. We're going to explore that later. But more importantly, you might be wondering how we can use a heavily populated area when we're supposed to adventure inside of a dungeon. This is super easy. Just put your settlement right on top of the dungeon. Say there's a mine or elevator shaft leading to the dungeon. Have someone ask the players to find a MacGuffin or missing person inside the dungeon, and you're off to the races. So now we need a missing item and a missing person. For a missing item, we're gonna say it's a ward against curses, a protective amulet. That's actually redundant, don't tell anyone. That was lost deep in the dungeon. Our missing person is going to be the mayor's daughter, an adventurer in training who snuck into the dungeon after leaving a note behind. Speaking of the dungeon, making the dungeon is a pretty easy process. My go-to is Appendix A from the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, and maybe starting with a theme, like a Fey Hollow, or a Dwarven Machine or something like that. But you can go online, use random generators, lift existing dungeon levels off Google Images for all I care, and dump them straight into yours. Nobody can stop you. You don't need to get heavily invested in the dungeon structure for your first adventure. You don't need to do it at any point, but especially not for your first one. It is literally just a backdrop for different threads and side objectives. Once your location is a little bit more put together, it's time to make yourselves some factions to interact with the players. Factions are present to affect your players' reputations, give them directions to complete certain quests, especially useful during these tutorial sessions, and provide them with resources for continuing their mission. I like to break these factions down by alignment. You have some official law enforcement adjacent faction, a guild that operates outside the law but isn't worth exterminating for whatever reason, and a faction to be the default bad guys. In a city, your bonus law enforcement is probably something like a bounty commission for taking hits out on murderers, escaped prisoners, and some monsters who've managed to infiltrate city limits. Your outside the law but friendly faction is the classic Thieves Guild. Your faction of nominally evil, disposable bad guys could be anything, but this is the first adventure, so just make it something at odds with the other factions. Maybe it's a carnival troupe cult from out of town or a band of mercenaries. When factions fight one another, they can use the player characters as proxies for their battles, and that means going on adventures. Alright, y'all have a location and a few factions in mind. The last thing you want to write down is a focus of opposition for whatever your adventure is going to be. I mentioned it last here because firstly, antagonists tend to shift in a grand campaign. Whoever the party considers literally Hitler could be their ally next week, and they might even be happy about it, not to mention the effect of large player rosters, meaning that one party's best friend could be another party's mortal enemy, and those two groups might mix. A force of nature tearing across the campaign map, a disease or curse spreading across the land, the party might just lose interest in that kind of stuff. There's a decent chance whatever your party opposes just won't be relevant from week to week. Second, your development of this opposing force is going to change as you move on to structure, which we'll get into next. It probably sounds like to you, the listener, that I just don't think a bad guy is that important to setting up this first adventure, and you'd be right. We're gonna do a video on bad guys, but really for tutorial sessions like this, you can go as generic or lazy as you want. It's not what's important to the campaign, and you'll see why once we get to consequences. As far as this adventure premise goes, for mysteries involving lost magic items, I tend to like Indiana Jones style villains, folks who regard the item as having religious or political significance, or better yet, an evil version of Indiana Jones. But like I said, the so-called bad guys are really not important to your first attempt, and that person can probably double for, the mayor's missing daughter. He's probably the one who kidnapped her, or is keeping her away, or something like that. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to structure. Sticking with the mystery idea from earlier, we need an item or person for your players to find, which means they have to pick up clues. In order to complete their objective, players need opportunities to pick up hints with all three of the following: narrating their actions, using predefined game mechanics, and through simple predefined chance and events. In other words, the player who wants to go out and ask around bars all day should get some value out of their activity. If a player character can use spells or skills to learn what their targets are thinking, then you should be prepared to give them information accordingly, and there should be some chance the players happen to walk across a person of interest, someone they can help, threaten, etc., and gain leverage over the mystery as a result. Now, the trick to these mysteries is really invoking a sense of progression as your players pick up clues. When you look at a puzzle board, you can watch the image come to life as you sort through the pieces, but in a game, you don't even start out with most of the pieces, and for this reason I like the clues my players acquire to, in some way, complete smaller pieces of the puzzle, which may then get slapped together to complete the big one. Say let's use an example here because I have to. Say your players are adventuring through a dungeon, and throughout the dungeon they find 4 parts of a passphrase which unlocks a door, and they find 3 different elemental attunements which can unlock a different door, and they find 3 pieces of a key that go to another door, but behind each of these doors is a piece of another key which lets you get through the last secret door. I'm trying to keep this analogy down to its base elements for the sake of the presentation, but y'all have no idea how long part 2 of this video script got before I decided that I actually needed a part 1. So this is my punishment, basically. In other words, you can give different threads of the mystery, though this works for other types of adventures, like fetch quests, I guess, a specific focus. Here's a thread focused on the why. Why would someone want this person or object you're chasing? Who might be capable of finding the MacGuffin or capturing the hostage you have to save? When might that MacGuffin or person of interest be available to take? How could the players get a hold of them? The answer to each of these questions can be assembled to answer the most important question, how do we win this quest? But the who, what, when, where, why, and how can all have their answers assembled in play. It's worth considering what pieces of the puzzle your players start with they initially have access to, because they might try to avoid adventuring entirely in favor of basically trying to bully you into giving them all of the puzzle pieces above ground. This is not acceptable. Progressing the game is made through play, and for this reason I'd actually start the players off in the dungeon. Start them off at the base of the elevator shaft, let them know they have a certain number of hours before the elevator is even sent back down, which they can measure using how many torches or flasks of oil they go through, and tell them their objective. Look for as many signs of the mayor's daughter or the protective amulet as you can find, and then you come back up to town to report in and rest. Then the players can hang out and chat with the NPCs. Now we come to the meat and potatoes of our first adventure, encounters. We've got combat encounters, social encounters, traps, and puzzles, and we're going to start with combat. We want combat encounters to be all over the place. We want lots of critters in our dungeon, and combat encounters are a lot easier to place rapidly if you just rely on random rolls. Back in the old days, monsters had a list of number appearing. We're not going to care about balance here. We're not going to care about whether the number appearing, the result of the number appearing is going to work for balance or anything like that. And let me explain what I mean, because other RPG YouTubers will tell you to obsess over making a challenging fight. Encounter design doesn't stop with initiative and other nonsense. And when they say they don't care about balance, they usually mean I throw over-leveled encounters at the players almost exclusively. Their baseline for balance is challenging, and that's not what I mean. When I say that we don't care about balance, I mean we're going to throw some skeletons into a room. We're going to roll 2d4 for number appearing, and maybe we get 8, and maybe we get 2. If I get 8 skeletons, that might be tough for a first level party, but I'll keep the result. The players don't have to fight them necessarily, it's their responsibility to get a move on, to find some other method or means of progress. But if I get a roll of 2 skeletons, that's going to be an absolute cakewalk, even for lower level characters, but I will still keep that result. In fact, it's likely the majority of encounters your players meet are going to be underleveled cannon fodder, only wearing the players down slightly before they move on. This is how the game is meant to be played. They're supposed to go through a dozen, 2 dozen, preferably 3 dozen rooms in a night if they're really good or really lucky. And if y'all are getting stopped 3 rooms from the dungeon's entrance every game night, someone is doing something wrong. And it's probably the referee. Now, social encounters in a grand campaign can come from anywhere thanks to a little mechanic called reaction rolls. I made a video about those. Reaction rolls go all the way back to the hobby's beginning. There should be a little card up here. It'll give you an in-depth explanation on the subject. Long story short, reaction rolls are designed to give your players a chance to make even nominally hostile dungeon encounters friends or neutral parties or potential quest givers. For this video, here's the short of things. Social encounters are generally non-violent tests of your player's ability to negotiate and seek information with a responsive partner. See, looking for a secret door involves your players trying to invent excuses for their characters to find the door. Chatting with an NPC is similar. Your players invent excuses for the NPC to give them something, but unlike secret doors and other passive targets, an NPC can participate in the giving of excuses, allowing the referee to accommodate players as they try to invent new adventure fodder. The way this should play into your first adventure and reaction rolls writ large is by providing the players with side quests and offering rewards or information off the bat. The players can run into kobolds in the dungeon, and if a reaction roll turns in their favor, well, the kobolds might want something. And they say, hey, we'll give you some information on where the mayor's daughter is. We saw a lady with golden locks wearing leather armor speed past this way. We actually don't know anything about her, and we'll tell you where she went if you can get us the head of that slod in the room below. Not to mention, of course, NPCs can proactively approach the party, and the referee is free to recommend the players see what NPCs can offer them. The librarian wants a tome recovered from the 4th floor. The miner wants his pickaxe returned. The botanist wants a vegapigmy delivered and will pay extra if you capture the critter alive. The nature of these side quests reinforces objectives beyond simple combat, and are more likely to make use of utility spells and equipment which your players will in turn prepare. Traps are much like combat encounters. They damage the players and take away resources, but can be bypassed through resource expenditure and improvisation alike. Unlike combat encounters, there's not much chance for the players to turn a trap friendly, really. Instead of testing a monster's watchfulness, you test the players in turn. The trap basically always catches your players on the back foot while reminding the party this is not their domain. They do not have home field advantage. Traps can be used to the party's benefit, sure, but this generally involves beating it first. By and large, another difference with combat encounters in which hostility is avoided to make them social. Last up, we have puzzles. Puzzles are encounters which almost exclusively test the player's out-of-game knowledge rather than their tactical or strategic skill. The mental or abstract nature of tabletop games wipes out most visual puzzles, so most tend to represent as riddles, answering questions about in-game lore, and rarely as modifiers or meta-circumstances on other encounter types. Conventional play encourages referees to never place puzzles in mission-critical locations, but this is a grand campaign. Not only are players encouraged to seek out multiple methods of progress, but it's okay to hold some goodies hostage with a puzzle, because they could always come back later and figure it out. My only recommendation on placement for the sake of this video is this, and I took this from Particularist, the designer of Ransack. Allow the players to solve the puzzle after they've moved on. It's almost entirely down to player skill anyway, so tell the players they can work on it while they continue adventuring. After a few episodes of play, you and your campaign participants will be ready for an expansion of the milieu, the territory around the settlement, likely the home, city, or town of the adventurers, other nearby habitations, wilderness areas, and whatever else you determine is right for the area, should be sketch mapped, and the place is likely to become settings for play actually done in detail. At this time, it is probable that you will have a large-scale map of the whole continent or subcontinent involved. Some rough outlines of the political divisions of the place, notes on predominant terrain features, indications of the distribution of creature types, and some plans as to what conflicts are likely to occur. In short, you will have to create the social and ecological parameters of a good part of a make-believe world. The more painstakingly this is done, the more real this creation will become. Now that all might sound like a tall order, like too complex to manage. I just know you're wondering, how in the hells am I supposed to make not just one, but many versions of a nail-biting, action-packed adventure thread that's adrenaline-fueled and fun to boot? But believe it or not, this is the simplest, though not the easiest skill this humble series will teach you. I'm going to call it cloning. We workshopped this for a little bit. Cloning is where you take threads, the base elements of your adventures, and replicate them over and over and over again before you edit the individual circumstances to be different. See, you only need to change a few parameters before an encounter, environment, or obstacle looks completely unrecognizable from its source. Finding a coffin full of potions, or a crate full of animal pelts, or a set of magic paints in some artist's toolkit all count as treasure, but they all feel different. Kobolds, imps, and wolves are all low-level enemies, but encounters with these monsters should feel different if you're playing a well-designed game. Once you establish a pattern, a general pattern of encounters, traps, puzzles, and treasure, filling in the blanks is a minor amount of work compared to making each thread from whole cloth. I have a second technique for keeping adventure threads from going to waste: scissors. The term is a dogfighting maneuver where you force your own craft to lose momentum by turning, putting you and your opponent side by side as you cross each other's paths over and over again. Here's what it means in tabletop games: making adventure threads crisscross one another such that they have encounters in common. In a mystery, it's perfectly reasonable for multiple people to deliver the party a clue. The librarian says your missing person was interested in the weather control room on the dungeon's 3rd floor. A sentient mushroom has to be transplanted to the same area in exchange for information. An interrogated kobold says they keep prisoners on the 4th floor in the same wing of that very dungeon. These are all separate paths, but they have a single location or area in common. This example is a little railroady. It's only focused on multiple ways of getting to one place, so let's try another. Let's say our multiple threads all involve getting into the 3rd floor or below. What if there's one or two obvious ways of getting from the 2nd floor to the 3rd? We'll say there's an elevator or chute that has a guardian. Maybe it's a statue that comes to life, or a ghost possessing a mirror, something you can either justify coming back to life later on, or something sufficiently dangerous that nobody really tries to kill it, they just try to get past. Well, now, no matter what thread the players chase, you now have a good chance of using this one encounter. Your players might try to avoid the more known portions of the dungeon in favor of seeking out less mapped territory, seeking an alternative route down. That's totally fine, because you have one piece of the dungeon that acts as a known quantity. You have something to bounce off of when it comes to randomly generating other components. You have extra time, you have spare resources to make use of. Now, perhaps y'all still don't like the thought of wasting prepared material, but lucky for you, there's nothing stopping you from reusing material. If your players go off and try to find another elevator or staircase, you can put another guardian in front of it. I have a handy ruler or measurement for whether your adventure threads can be reused efficiently, and here we're going to call it asymmetry. If some of your combat encounters involve 2 or more sides with different equipment or strategies, or environmental hazards, you've actually doubled the number of combat encounters you have prepared. Let's take an example. We'll say an encounter has heavily armored, shielded troops on one side trying to cross a bridge and kill archers with high ground on the other side. This is really 2 separate combat encounters. Maybe it's really 4 separate combat encounters. Which side do your players support? Maybe both sides are default hostile, but the players just appear behind one of the 2. If the players walk up behind the archers, the experience will be completely different compared to walking up behind the shielded troops. And as a bonus, if your players recognize the encounter structure or dynamic the next time you reuse it, The next time you reuse it, it's deja vu all over again. It will further change their behavior and their experience by extension. Just one more example. This time we're going to use our elevator guardian from earlier. Instead of trying to keep the players from getting into the elevator, see what the guardian can try to do is keep your players from escaping. Say there's a mirror haunted by a ghost. Say the mirror normally lets the ghost possess people in its reflection. In an approach encounter, the goal is to move a possessed ally out of the mirror's reflection, but in an exit encounter, the goal is to keep yourselves out of sight if you even know the mirror is there. Eventually, as player characters develop and grow powerful, they will explore and adventure all over the area of the continent. When such activity begins, you must then broaden your general map still farther as to encompass the entire globe. More still, you must begin to consider seriously the makeup of your entire multiverse, space, planets and their respective satellites, parallel worlds, the dimensions, and the planes. What is there? Why? Can participants in the campaign get there? How? Will they? Never fear, by the time your campaign has grown to such a state of sophistication, you will be ready to handle the new demands. Now that y'all have some of your adventure ingredients, it's time to start baking. You have some factions written down, and by this time you've prepared some social encounters. Start tying social encounters to said factions. You have adventure threads, objectives, and goals for your players to use as a compass when running through our adventure location, a dungeon. Start laying those threads over the dungeon. Tell us where those side quests are supposed to occur. Roll to see what encounters and critters await your players in the dungeon if you haven't already. As you go through this process, and again when you play through your dungeon, get ready. Little coincidences are going to pop up which imply additional adventure threads or consequences behind the scenes. A trap will find itself rolled next to a piece of treasure with a party of kobolds on the other side. It's pretty easy to come up with excuses for why the kobolds are present. If there's a magic item in that treasure, maybe something happens when the kobolds reach it. To you, it's just an alchemy judge or a chalice of healing, but the kobolds are hauling monster parts around and weird alchemical reagents, and to them, it's a tribe's ticket to resurrecting a green dragon. This is where we come to developing a timeline of consequences. This timeline exists to display how, over the course of, let's say a couple months, we're going to give your players time to actually adventure in the location. Probably. This is more for you just starting out to get used to the game writ large. You're going to set your consequences a little bit further out to see how different events in your adventure location are going to branch out across the campaign map. If the kobolds succeed in finding their treasure and succeed in resurrecting a green dragon, that's a process that you could allow to take 2 months or so. Well, a bunch of kobolds might exit the dungeon and find a new home nearby, and then you have an army of kobolds and a green dragon, and maybe more green dragons. Maybe you get a hatchery of new baby young dragons that are going to start raising the countryside, or maybe not raising the countryside. Maybe they pose themselves as advisors to kings and lords and mayors and get to corrupting the surrounding political influences and factions of the campaign map. Well, now you need to consider exactly who the political influences and factions on the campaign map really are. And that is exactly what Gary Gygax was discussing when he said that we were going to expand as time goes on. Every faction or artifact or person, NPC or whatever have you that exits from the dungeon, every party that exits from the dungeon is going to go to a new place, and with each new place, they're going to have an impact on the place. That means you need to know roughly what that place is about, and it needs to have some adventure fodder attached to it, or to another place that's nearby. That timeline is your key to knowing that you're running a grand campaign. And part 2 of this video will give you a soup to nuts example of how I do this. But until then, it is time to get out of here. Folks, thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you like this, be sure to do the algorithm things right. Hit the bell, subscribe, click like. Does the like button do anything anymore? Click it just in case. This video took me way too long to produce, because originally I wasn't even producing this video. I was writing the part 2, what is now the part 2 of Your First Adventure, where I tried to make an example from whole cloth and start and input everything that I could possibly imagine into my prep, if you will. And that not only does that not necessarily translate well to video, a lot of the what would I say, the most important elements of the game and the principles behind my adventure fodder were getting lost with the specific elements I was trying to explain to everybody. So it just wasn't working. So I decided to make this instead, boil down the abstract concepts and deploy them in a video like this one. I don't know if the part 2 to Your First Adventure is going to be, or in fact, it's probably not going to be our next video. I want to focus on some other things, like combat encounters, or how to design dungeons. I think those are much more conducive to giving examples and theory or design principles in the same video, without making something that's 2 hours long and has, I don't know, 40 pages of supplementary material. We're probably going to hold off on the example, right? I could do a dungeon. I could do a how to make a dungeon pretty easily, and that might be my next video. I have a few different things I want to address, though, so we're gonna see what comes up next. Something we haven't talked about so far is the social layer. How do we organize a grand campaign? How do we pick people up? Who's going to be a patron? Who's going to be a referee? Who's going to be a player? A lot of these things can actually be taken care of. I designed the playlist to explain how to do this stuff from one table to many tables, right? From one set of, I don't know, 3 to 6 players at your first table, and how that could spiral out into many different tables and many different referees and many different forms of participation, both online and at the table physically, IRL, right? But that's not how everybody's going to begin. Some people are going to go into the comments and say, I want to join a grand campaign. Some of them are going to join my Discord. I link it next to the handy Patreon link where you could support me. You could also support me by just joining my Discord and hanging out and talking about your games, or joining one of my games that I have ongoing now. Some of you are going to start a grand campaign that way, and guess what? You need support as well. So I think, yeah, that might be our next video. We're gonna see what happens. It's a toss-up, right? It's a toss-up between either the organization, right, discussing the social principles behind the grand campaign and how this works, or it's going to be about something, again, down to earth, salt of the earth, fun stuff, how to make a dungeon. I love dungeons, they're so much fun. But until next time, peace, peace.